It is the annual Holocaust Remembrance Day, and we are not forgetting. 6 million Jews and 5 million other men and women perished during World War II. Today, at midday, 6 survivors will each light a candle and share testimony from that period in time. The theme of this year's ceremony is memory, resilience and hope. Joining me now for more is Wendy Khan, the National Director of the SA Jewish Board of Deputies. Wendy, a very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Obviously a very important day today, very emotional. Tell us how it's going to play out. What have you got planned?
We're having a ceremony at 12 o'clock today, as we do every year, where we remember what happened to, and it was more than 6 million people, but it was 6 million Jewish people who perished at the hands of the Nazis. And there's some we've got 6 survivors who are going to be sharing their personal stories in concentration camps. And what's very important is that each of them is going to give a message. So, for example, we've got one of the survivors is going to talk about how important it is to perpetuate the memories even after the survivors are no longer here to tell their own stories, using technology, using, for example, holograms. We have another survivor who is going to talk about how Auschwitz never dropped from the sky. It started with words and it started with hate, and we need to be exceptionally vigilant in terms of what is being said around us. And I mean, that is just so opportune at the moment, globally and even in our country. A third survivor, Ella Blumenthal from Cape Town, who she's lived here her life and had her children and her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren in South Africa. And she talks about the 7 siblings that she lost in the Holocaust. And can you imagine if they had had children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren, what they would have brought into the world today, and how heartbreaking that those generations were never able to come into the world.
Just tell us why it's so important to remember today. I mean, there you've got survivors highlighting some of the lessons that they learned. But how do we take what happened and bring it to today, and in order for us to find some sort of hope?
I don't think that these are lessons necessarily that they have learned. These are lessons that they have learned that they want to share with us, and lessons that we need to bring into our own lives and into our societies to make sure that a genocide doesn't happen again. And I think that that point about it starts with words and it starts with vitriol, and we need to be incredibly vigilant, and we need to be listening to these stories. And unfortunately this year, since the beginning of last year, we've lost 11 survivors, Holocaust survivors. These were people that brought those messages to us on an ongoing basis, and we need to find ways that we can continue those legacies and continue those messages into the future. We need to learn from history, and that is imperative.
I know the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu drew a parallel between the genocide and the threat that he says the Jewish state faces from Iran. I mean, I guess when a community has experienced such loss, that sort of threat will never leave you.
Absolutely. It's a traumatized community, and I think you know, when we experience anti-Semitism, and sadly anti-Semitism is on the rise globally, and we've seen horrific incidents in the last years, we have to take note, and we as a community can't sit by and say, not to worry, if words are said and things are said, let's just, you know, sort of fob it off. We can't do that. It's too close. We still have people in our lives that experienced those camps and that went through what they went through and lost so many members of their family. And we've got a very interesting dimension to our ceremony this year. Every year we read names of victims of the Holocaust. We can't read 6 million names, but we can read some names in our ceremony just to remember that they weren't just statistics and they weren't just numbers, but they were individuals. And we remember the names, and we remember where they came from, and we remember where they died and how old they were. And many of them obviously were children. And we say those names. But this year we reached out to the Jewish community in South Africa and in Mauritius. And we said to them, send the names of people in your family who were lost during the Holocaust. And those are the names that are going to be read this year. Those names will be read from learners in Johannesburg, Cape Town, Durban, Port Elizabeth, East London, all around our country, and also from learners in Mauritius. And we have a survivor this year who he was in a detainment camp in Mauritius, Bourgason, and he will talk and he will share his experiences as well. So it's a very meaningful and a very moving ceremony. And I think I'd like to encourage people to join us. Because this isn't just something that Jewish people need to remember. This is something that everybody needs to remember.
How do they do that, Wendy?
They can come onto the South African Jewish Board of Deputies Facebook page, South African Jewish Board of Deputies, and we'll be screening it live.
Okay. Just lastly, I mean, it really resonates when you talk about words. I mean, we see a lot of angry, threatening words here in South Africa. This is really a message that we need to take. And I should imagine it's very important for the young South Africans, whether you're Jewish or not, to push the message of peace ahead. So we never see this kind of thing again.
Yes, and I think that's also an aspect that we have brought into our ceremony this year. We have a lot of involvement by young people because we need to, and we call it le dor va dor, from one generation to another generation. No longer are we going to have survivors to tell the stories. We need to pass those lessons on to young people so that they can perpetuate not just the memories of the victims, but also the memories of and the learning from that horrific time in history.
Okay, Wendy, we are all with you today. Thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.